Do we have racial equity within our movement? Welcome to Activist. I'm Gareth.
And I'm Jackie.
In today's episode, we talk to Christopher Soul Eubanks about the links of oppression and also what it's like to be a black activist in the animal rights movement.
To quote Chris, he says, "As long as race is used as a tool to oppress, it will continue to limit our movement's growth and our ability to help achieve liberation for all beings."
This is such an important interview and it delves into some very deep topics, so we hope you enjoy it as much as we did. And if you enjoy this content, then smash that like button, drop a comment below if you learned something, and subscribe to the YouTube channel to keep this series going.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Chris. You describe yourself as a creative and an activist who creates art and media to promote a vegan diet and lifestyle. How long have you been on this journey, and what was the catalyst for you becoming vegan?
Ooh, thank you for allowing me to be here. That's a really good question. My journey started, honestly, when I was a teenager. I became aware of how bad, I guess, animal products were to consume through this book called How to Eat to Live. One of my favorite books is the autobiography of Malcolm X. And in this book, he talks about his advisor, Elijah Muhammad, and the book that he wrote called How to Eat to Live. So I was interested in learning more, and I read the book, and it talks about how bad animal products were for your body. So at the time I was 13, I didn't know anybody that was vegan or vegetarian. I didn't even really know what veganism was. So I wasn't even thinking about the ethical stance at that point. So I decided to stop eating animal products slowly. So I decided to go in small increments. So the first year when I was 13, I gave up eating pigs. And then 2 years later, I said, okay, I'll stop eating cows now. And then 2 years later, when I was 17, I became fully vegetarian. But like I said, it wasn't for an ethical stance. It was just dietary. So that lasted for about 10 years. I think after a decade, I just kind of started to feel weird and isolated. I didn't know any other real vegetarians or vegans, and I just decided to start back eating animal products. But I would say about 5 years later, about 4 or 5 years later, I left my job, and I was working as a bank teller for 7 years. I loathed it, didn't like it at all. And I said, okay, I'm going to quit and just like really focus on who I want to be and find out what's important to me as a person. So I started to do things like learn about meditation and different forms of religious practices, whether it's like Hinduism or Buddhism, and came across veganism. And I decided, okay, I have to transition into being vegan. And then a few months later, I saw the documentary Cowspiracy. And after watching Cowspiracy, I went vegan right then and there on the spot. Threw all my animal products out. Well, I should say I became plant-based at that moment. I threw all the animal products out and didn't eat animal products again. And I would say about 6 months later, I really started to become really aware of the ethical aspects of veganism. And once I learned more about that, I decided to begin doing activism. And ever since then, I've been doing activism in my community, whether it's organizing, doing outreach, and those types of things. But yeah, that's my journey into being, I guess, vegetarian at first, and then quitting that, then being, I guess, pescatarian, and then plant-based, and now vegan.
Fantastic. Oh, we always love hearing those stories.
Everyone's journeys, isn't it? Yeah, we're also...
It's always interesting, right? To hear somebody's story.
Definitely.
Well, some of our followers here may not have heard of you before this interview. Many of them may have seen your content on social media. Your tweets carry such power and depth within just a few words, and they've been reshared thousands of times. I know we share them quite a lot on Vegan FTA. It's over multiple platforms. We see these quotes everywhere. And do you have any tips for being heard on social media?
Oh, yeah. So in terms of, I guess, being effective at social media, one of the things that I do is I just really use my platform for what I believe in. You know, it's not about me. It's not about the things that I'm doing in terms of like my personal life. Like everything that I post is about advocacy. You know, I don't really share. I don't care to share things about my personal life and, you know, me hanging out with friends unless I'm doing an event or something. but all of my content is purpose driven. So I think if you're trying to be noticed, you should definitely have intent behind whatever you're doing. The second thing I would say is find a platform or a outlet that you're naturally good at, or one that is easiest for you. And for some reason, that just happened to be Twitter for me. Like, I've been using Twitter for over a decade. And once I started using it purposely, I started, thinking about the things that I wanted to say, because I realized that, okay, now the things that I say, I really want them to represent my ethical stance. So how do I want to say these things? Do I just want to share my feelings? And for some people, that's totally fine. You can just randomly share what you want. But me, I'm just a thinker. So I think a lot about how I say things and what I want to say. So what I end up doing is I end up writing a lot of drafts in my tweets. So I have like 2 phones right now with drafts of tweets. So there's just things that I wrote down, and I'm like, okay, this kind of says what I want to say, and this almost conveys it, but not quite. So I literally write the draft, and I just keep writing drafts. And, every week or so, I go back into the drafts and I keep fine tuning them. And after time, I began to have enough to where I could just start spreading them out. So essentially just, take your time, find a platform that works for you, and treat it like a craft. I think that's one of the ways, if you want to, use your platform and get the message out as wide as you can. At least that's what has worked for me so far.
Thank you. That's some brilliant advice there.
Definitely. It's definitely working. I mean, I think I have to say, you are the person that keeps me on Twitter, because I'm really rubbish at the platform. I can try and come up with something that I think is really profound and like, oh, this is going to go viral. And then like nobody sees it, So I've just about given up on it because, I just don't know what I'm doing. But every time I see something, whether it's on Twitter or also Instagram as well, it's always like, oh man, that's really on point. And I'm like, Soul Eubanks, every time you're always so on point. So we'll have links to all your social media, but it's definitely brilliant advice. Maybe I guess I'm not putting enough time or thought into what I'm doing. But since going vegan, you've shown yourself to be a natural leader by establishing and coordinating a whole range of events for a multitude of organizations. And you've also been recently added to the board, the advisory board at Encompass. Can you tell us a bit about the organization and its focus on leadership?
Absolutely. So Encompass, for those of you all that don't know, this is an organization that fights for the racial equity within the animal rights movement. They've been around for, I think, almost 2 years now. I could be wrong, but around 2 years or so. And they have a lot of initiatives. They help consult with organizations on making sure that they have diversity within their organizations, and they help mentor and do a variety of things. One of the things that I'm excited about that they are doing, or I should say we're doing now, is we have a executive leadership program where it's going to teach Black and Indigenous and people of color about how to, run organizations, how to get how to fundraise money, how to negotiate things. It's just teaching, people from these communities skill sets, specifically in animal rights, that, haven't been largely introduced to them. And I'm a part of the program too. Like, I'm learning literally every week, along with, about 20 other people that are doing work in animal advocacy. So that's one of the things that I'm really excited about. They're literally building leaders and making sure that they have equity within the animal rights community, with the knowledge that Michelle and Arianesh, they are the co-founders of Encompass. They've learned a lot. They have been running their organization for a couple of years and have great experience with running organizations. So they're just like disseminating that information onto us as students.
It's a fantastic initiative. And are these courses, are they free or paid?
So they're free. So the way it works right now, this is the first one. And well, this particular course is free. So you just submit your information, and if you're either a thought leader or influencer or trying to run an organization or just want to learn more, you submit your application and they select the participants from there. And the other services that Encompass offers vary. So they do another racial equity training to organizations, and this is, the organizations pay for this training. So it's like a 2-day course, and I participated in the previous one for 2 days. It was about 50 of us, and we were just talking about a variety of things around racial equity within animal rights and outside of animal rights, and definitions, and how to bring up these issues, how to create infrastructures in your organization that contribute to more diversity, equity, and inclusion. So they offer a variety of things, but the course that we're going through, the executive program, is free.
Well, that's fantastic. It's great to have so many resources out there that are accessible, and also having that balance between the free content and the content that means that you guys can keep going, because one of the major things in activism is actually funding is a huge issue. But here at Vegan FGA, we share the belief that fostering racial equity across our movement is key to our growth and development. As a Black activist, what has been your experience of this equity so far? Does the movement feel inclusive to you?
So it's starting to feel a lot more inclusive. I've never felt, excluded as a Black person per se, but I can say there have been tons of times where I just didn't feel included. So I don't feel like I was purposely being excluded, but I don't feel like there was a lot of initiative to, bring in people of color or just more diverse crowds. But I think more now than ever, the issue is being raised, and so many people and organizations are starting to have these conversations, because when I first started doing animal advocacy, the conversations weren't really there as much as they are now. So it's slowly happening. I think, unfortunately, with the killing of George Floyd, our society kind of re-examined the way that we operate in regards to how we view race in our society. Even though things like killings like what happened to George Floyd had been happening, for eons, it was something about seeing him in that manner that really struck a chord with society. And I think that rippled throughout so many facets of our society, and activism and animal advocacy is one. So yeah, I think it's getting better. We still have a long way to go, like a really long way, but I do think the conversations are being had more often, and people are being open about them.
Oh, it's awesome to hear, and that the work that you guys are doing in Encompass as well will definitely help with that, I'm sure. But I have to say, until recently, really recently, we were actually under the impression that we've mentioned equity a bit so far, and we've been under the impression until recently that racial equality and equity were one and the same. However, there's actually quite a big difference between the two. So since it's going to come up a fair bit in this interview, would you mind explaining what that difference is?
Oh, absolutely. So I think one way of looking at it is, even myself, like I work at an animal rights organization, and I have friends of color that work at different animal rights organizations. And, inside the organization, we're treated fine and fairly, at least a lot of the ones that I know personally. I can't speak for people's experiences that aren't similar to mine or that I don't know. But yeah, we enjoy our work. We enjoy the organizations that we work with. And, we're treated equal in these spaces for the most part. But we don't necessarily have equity. We don't have ownership. We don't make the decisions that guide the organization. We are grateful to work there. We love what we are doing, but we don't have people in positions of power. And, it's honestly just a microcosm of our society, of our larger society. Even when you look at what's happening, and when you look at the government in the United States and how it's mostly made up of, white people, and it doesn't have the diversity that it should. I think that kind of trickles down in our society, and the same things has happened in the animal rights movement. So equity is just about making sure that you not only have people in the movement, but do these people have a say? Do they have positions of power? Are they on board seats? Do they run organizations, or are they just there at protest, or just volunteers or interns? What's the power dynamic between these people in these situations?
We're seeing so many more studies coming out now about, fostering that diversity, and that is really, getting everything to excel, and it's what we need to be doing as a movement, and the definition that we saw was about basically equality only sort of happens when everyone starts at the same level, as opposed to equity means that, your levels are already out of balance before you begin, and then trying to meet that. Like, would that be about right?
Yeah, I would say so. I think there's a great graphic that shows what equity and equality is. It's like two people picking apples from a tree, and they both have a basket full of apples, and they both have access to the same amount of apples. But one person has like a taller ladder, and the person with a taller ladder is on the side of the tree with a lot more apples. And the other person on one side of the tree, their ladder is shorter, and their side of the tree has fewer apples. So yeah, we're able to pick and get the same amount of apples, but one side is heavily at a disadvantage, and the other side is just it's so much more convenient. So yeah, it's about the starting points and how this infrastructure is set from the beginning.
It's a brilliant analogy for that.
Yeah, thanks for your explanation. That makes it a lot clearer.
But you've said recently that some white advocates feel that addressing human rights issues in the animal rights movement, we are being counterproductive to our cause and doing a disservice to the animals. The normalization of ignoring other forms of oppression has been used to build the framework of much of our culture in the animal rights community today. At Vegan FTA, we stand firmly with you on that issue. Can you explain more about this for our viewers?
Yeah, I think we tend to look at the advocacy in the animal rights community and the people that are advocating. We love the work that we're doing, but I think we often don't see all the people that don't come into the movement, or that are uncomfortable coming into the movement. So it's just a way of saying, we have to understand that we as humans, this isn't a movement about us. So we are advocating for animals. And while we're advocating for animals, we need to know that, this movement doesn't belong to us. And we are just, advocating for others. So we have to understand how the things that impact us in our society, and the human rights issues and social justice issues between us, how it impacts this movement that is about others. Because we don't have cows in a position to fight for themselves. All other social justice movements are pretty much led by the people that are disadvantaged, except the animal rights movement. So the fact that we aren't the ones that are, being exploited as animals in animal agriculture, we have to understand how that racial dynamic plays out in our in this movement. Because like I said, we tend to see the work that we're doing, but it's so many other perspectives and so much more insight that could come from other people, and other social justice movements. Initiatives and ideas have so much more that we can learn from. But when we have this framework of, only advocating, only seeing it through one lens, and, activist shaming in a sense, I see a lot of that happening because we have just these laser focused ideas about, only speaking on animal rights issues. And that's totally fine. We just can't ignore the other issues that impact the animal rights movement. So this movement will forever belong to the animals. But we have to understand, as humans that are at odds with each other about a variety of things, how that affects the animal rights movement.
Yeah, so true. Definitely does. And, we've mentioned already that you've been, a huge part of a lot of events and organization, and your leadership is just phenomenal. And recently, Mercilessly. Recently, Mercy for Animals, who we love, announced their pilot grant program, the People's Fund. This program focuses on distributing funds among Black activists working to build a compassionate plant-based food system. As one of the recipients, yay! How has this grant helped to empower and further your activism?
Oh, so this is honestly the foundation of like the next frontier of my activism. So I had an idea maybe sometime in the middle of last year to start my own animal rights organization. And it was something that I was like, okay, I'll do it in a couple of years, or, whenever the opportunity presents itself. If I get some funding at some point, I'll do it, but I just wasn't pressed to do it. And when I saw this grant pop up, I was like, oh, wow, I wonder if this could help me in my initiative and if I could do anything with that. So I applied for the grant, and, lo and behold, I received enough funds to get me started. So what I'm doing right now is I'm going to get a team together, and we're first going to focus on content. So we're going to focus on a variety of content. I do have one initiative that I'm starting that I don't want to say yet, but once I start this initiative, I think it's going to be pretty interesting. But yeah, the first goal is to create content, and I'm going to focus on doing that around the summertime. So around the summertime, you should see a lot of content starting to be produced from my advocacy group. And I would say we're going to take the rest of the year to kind of figure out our first initial campaigns and, decide if we want to have chapters in other cities and states and other regions of the world. But as of right now, the funds that I'm getting are helping me to build a foundation of creatives that will create content to help get our name out there. And then we'll decide on what campaigns and actions we want to do going forward.
Fantastic. I'm sure here at FTA will be helping to share some of that stuff when it's ready to
look forward
release.
to hear more about that. That'll be awesome.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Don't worry. Well, that's what we're here for, to help empower activism, and while researching the People's Fund, the common theme occurs among many of the other recipients in the fight for building equity in our food systems and making plant-based eating a viable option for Black communities. Having viewers from around the world, some may not be aware of the battle to provide these opportunities and options within those communities, and not actually realize how crucial it is for the empowerment of these communities. Can you explain a little bit about this for our audience?
Absolutely. So in a lot of the communities of color in America and even in other parts of the world, we live in areas where these are lower income communities that don't have proper access to food, proper access to healthy food, or, just whole plant-based foods. So, we're trying to, help bring more awareness to this issue, because it's something that a lot of people aren't aware of. A lot of people don't know that, a lot of these foods disproportionately, negatively, animal products negatively impact people of color. You have things that are being said, like how dairy is racist, how the majority of the world is lactose intolerance, and it's even a higher percentage in Black and African American communities and Asian communities, where our bodies just don't process dairy and milk, in any manner. So, these issues are things that overlap and intersect, and it's important to understand how these issues impact certain communities more than others.
Yeah, no, that's really good. Thank you for the explanation. And for us, as proud partners of the Divinity Women's Coalition, Vegan FTA has taken part in events, and we've promoted the campaign for US Vice President Kamala Harris to go vegan. In fact, it's been in the news recently that she is dabbling in veganism, so that's great. Hopefully she keeps on with that dabbling and takes it even further. But this campaign is calling for her to spearhead a transition to a sustainable, healthy, and equitable food system that offers solutions to battle both this coronavirus pandemic and prevent future pandemics. And a crucial part of the campaign is highlighting that fact that you mentioned, that, the Black communities are put the most at risk by the systemic injustices, should I say, that are still being propagated. It's so important that we know that, the Black communities are the most susceptible because of the lactose intolerant. We need to get these products out of the diet. Is this something that we need not just people of color to be raising awareness of, but all influencers, regardless of their connection to the cause? Honestly.
No, absolutely. We need everybody doing everything because, one of the things that I've heard within the past year that's really become more of a talking point is about how, racism isn't a issue. Black people didn't, or any oppressed beings didn't create the racism and the discrimination that they experienced. It comes from the oppressors. So it has to be corrected. It's not something that I or a person of color can fix. It's something that needs to be fixed externally. So people who are in positions of power that perpetuate these oppressions are the ones that honestly have to do the work. We can educate people about, our experiences and how we've been wronged and how marginalized communities are exploited, and even outside of race, when you think about other social justice issues, when you look at women's rights, women could talk all day about how they are being objectified and sexualized in our society. So it's on the perpetrators to change their behavior. It's not on the people that are being victimized to change. We can only educate and bring awareness, but honestly, it's going to have to come from a different perspective. The people that are in control and continuing this cycle of oppression, that's going to have to change. And that's nothing that I can personally do to change someone else's behavior. They have to make the decision themselves to change that behavior. So that's why it's very important for not only the people that are being marginalized or being oppressed to speak out, but, the final say-so comes down to the person that has the power to oppress.
Very true. So, in a recent article you wrote for Sentient Media, you gave a powerful and invaluable insight into what it's like to be a Black activist, or Black animal rights activist especially. One important issue you raised was the link between the forms of oppression and how they further entrench other oppression, especially the oppression of the animals. Would you mind sharing a little bit about this with our audience?
Absolutely. So I think there's unfortunately so many systems of oppression that uphold animal oppression that it's incumbent upon us as a movement to not necessarily, we don't have to make that the focus of the movement, because this movement does belong to the animals, but we can't ignore all of these other systems of oppression. When you think about honestly, the sexual oppression of female animals and how their bodies are exploited, and even male animals, how they are forced to produce semen, and how they have electric roads pushing their bodies that force them to produce semen, how cows are forced to be pregnant every 9 months. This sexual exploitation is a oppression that happens in the oppression of animals. When we look at the workers that are in positions in these jobs working at slaughterhouses, and how these industries prey on people with low education or in dire needs, or refugees, or immigrants, they prey on people in vulnerable situations. So they put them in situations where they have to work jobs killing animals every day, and how that impacts the people's communities that they live in. They go home and they are desensitized to violence on a mass scale now. So that impacts our communities, and that impacts our society as a whole. So that's why it's very important that we understand how all of these other oppressions exist within the oppression of animals, and how it's on us to understand them. And by understanding them, that doesn't mean that we take the focus away from the animals at all. It just means that we don't ignore these other oppressions that help to keep animal oppression going.
I think one thing that's been symbolic of oppression over the years has been the sort of the image of a chain. And I think it works well in this sort of circumstance where, they're all interconnected. Each link of this chain is a different form of oppression. And if we can understand that this one at the top might be slightly damaged, might be slightly rusty, well, that's the chain's only as strong as its weakest link, And so if we can understand these different chinks in the chain, then hopefully we can help to break that oppression overall by understanding the rest of it. And it's such an important thing for all of our activists watching this. And even if you're not an activist yet, to try and understand who your adversary is, because the better we can understand them, the better we can combat the oppression that we're fighting.
Absolutely. We've just been reading in the news about how in the UK, a bill has been passed so that protests can no longer be held, even peaceful protests,
Wow.
And the first thing I thought was, well, what does that mean for the animals? That's a way that we can't speak up for them, even peacefully, that affects them so much if we can't get that awareness out there. It's just, it's never ending, but it's a fantastic article as well that you wrote for Sentient Media. We'll have to make sure that we link to that.
Yeah, it was brilliant.
Really, it's been getting such good feedback, and deservedly so. But to be most effective in our advocacy, we need to focus on those roots of oppression. And this means not only addressing who is being exploited or how they're being exploited, but also why that exploitation is happening in the first place. And we attended the animal activist mentorship workshop recently, which we thoroughly enjoyed, was absolutely brilliant, and you were a part of. And there you gave a brilliant insight into that why. Could you please share that insight with our viewers?
Absolutely. So I think a lot of times when we discuss the abuse of animals and the exploitation of animals, we often talk about how horrific it is. And when we describe how horrific it is, we often talk about the treatment of animals, how, like I discussed earlier, how cows are forced to be pregnant every 9 months, how, baby chicks are killed on their first day of life, how these chickens have been genetically altered and to produce more eggs, and how this is really straining on their body because they're only supposed to produce a certain amount of eggs a year, maybe 12 to 15, but they've been altered to produce, hundreds of eggs a year, and how this strips their bodies of nutrients and just all of these horrific things that happen to animals and their exploitation of them. But it's not necessarily about how they are being treated. It's about them being used at all. All use is exploitation, because these animals have a right to exist and be free from exploitation, just like any other animal in the animal kingdom. And when we focus on the how, sometimes it can take away the attention from the why. So we just have to make sure that we have a healthy balance of letting people know that even if these animals are raised in the best conditions and have a lot of grass to roam around in, and they're going to live a life of a higher quality than animals on factory farms, at the end of the day, their bodies are still being used and exploited. And that is the root of the problem right there, is the fact that we see them as things, we see them as items, we see them as objects, and we strip their existence away for our personal use. And when we do that, that begins the cycle of abusing them on such high levels. It is the gateway to justifying the exploitation and the abuse that they suffer. So I think it's very important that we don't have people think that it's just about the treatment of these animals only, that we also make sure that we balance out that it's not only about how bad they are being how bad they are being treated, but also the fact that they are even in this position in the first place.
I think it's also a very useful tool for activists as well to have those understandings of the who, the what, and the why, because each one of those can potentially be the key to unlocking that conversation with the person they're having the conversation with. For some people, that who might be the thing they might connect with, say, the pigs or the chickens or the fish, or they might connect with what's going on, that might be the triggering point for them to make a decision. But then, like for me, hearing the why, and just the fact that we're exploiting them, that's what triggers for me personally, you know, and yes, it's a useful tool to have in our arsenal for this.
Yeah.
But when trying to identify the roots of what we're fighting, it seems it's much easier in other areas as compared to veganism. One such example is the whole food plant-based movement. It's far easier for those advocates to go out and identify that the food culture is why people are getting disease and dying, which makes it quite easy for them just to transition and turn around with those different foods, you know. What are your thoughts about trying to I'll just rephrase that one. What are your thoughts about recognizing this in veganism? Do you have any tips for identifying the roots of our oppressors?
Yeah, so I think I see it slightly different. I think one of the things that I look at when I look at the roots of oppression, of any oppression, is the fact that we see others as different. And when we start to see them as different, we start to justify reasons that they can be exploited or abused because we see them as detached from ourselves. And I think this not only plays into how we treat other animals, but I think it plays a lot about how we look at our society in general, how we, you know, with like a lot of the deforestation that's going on now, we see these vast areas of land and we see that they are being destroyed so we can, you know, quote unquote, raise livestock. And I think when we start to separate ourselves from others, it starts to give us a justification to exploit and abuse others. So I think the root of it is, you know, we can't feel disconnected. I think once we start to feel disconnected from anybody or anything, you know, honestly, I feel like we're disconnected from ourselves. And I know that that's just something that I speak about when I do advocacy or when I do outreach. I try to, you know, not just make people understand that I am here for animal advocacy rights and the fact that they shouldn't live in a life where they are abused and exploited. But I also try to help people understand that, you know, we are all connected forms of energy. You know, we literally are. You know, nothing can exist without another thing. Like I can't exist without the air. The air can't exist without other molecules and other elements. You know, it's all intertwined, you know, where we have cells in our bodies. These cells multiply and we are like little cells moving on the earth. And the earth is one thing in the solar system and we have a bunch of solar systems. So, I mean, I kind of look at it like we're just small, tiny versions of the universe and we're all interconnected. So I guess I try to just let people understand that, you know, when we start to see other beings or other people as, you know, others, you know, quote unquote others, that's the root of the cause of the discrimination.
That's a wonderful insight.
Yeah, definitely. You know, it got me thinking about fish because, you know, and it's coming out now that fish, you know, do have feelings and they are in pain, they are suffering. And you know, before I went vegan, it was always fish didn't have feelings. You know, fish were different. They weren't the same as other animals. You know, they just didn't feel. And then to find out once going vegan that they're, you know, about the most abused.
Yeah, they are the most abused animals on earth.
Yeah, it's just horrible. It really, really hits home. So yeah, thank you for that explanation. It really, yeah, it's awesome, which is why you're doing such wonderful work in the animal activist mentorship, which we mentioned just before. And we love this group. Like I said, we really want to get along to more of your events. And it's yet another organization which you're part of and sharing your experience and leadership skills. We love what you guys are doing so much. It's so valuable, you know, whether you're new wanting to learn a bit more about activism or even, you know, experienced vegans and activists like us, we learn a lot from you guys. Can you tell us more about this brilliant group?
Yeah, so this group has been around for a little bit over a year now, and what we do is we have one-on-one mentorships with activists. So if you're an aspiring activist and let's say you've never done activism before, you're interested, or even if you're, you know, not even vegan yet and you want to learn how to advocate, what we do is you fill out this application on the website and you go to, and once you fill out the application, you are assigned a personal mentor, a one-on-one mentor that's experienced in advocacy. And this person, for 3 months helps you with any type of activism that you may be thinking of. So they're like your personal mentor and coach. So if you're trying to put together an event, if you don't know, how to be active in your community, you want to start a local, SAVE chapter in your community, or you just want to start a grassroots organization in your community, they can help you with, how to get attendance, how to plan events, things that you have to look out for. I mean, there's so many things that I didn't know when I first started organizing events that I know now that I just didn't even have to worry about. I didn't even think I had to think about these things. But once you start planning events and start doing actions and different types of campaigns, you start to get a lot more experience, and you can use that to guide others. So through the program, like I said, we assign you you are assigned a mentor, and for 3 months, they just kind of walk you through achieving certain goals that you want to be as an activist. So maybe your goal is to attend your first activism event, or maybe your goal is to start your own chapter. We try to work with you and help you just realize your potential in advocacy and bring it out as much as we can.
That's such a fantastic group.
It.
Yeah. Previously, one of your goals was to be able to be an animal rights advocate full time, and now you've achieved that goal. What's your visions and goals for the future?
Yeah, so I've been so grateful to, within the last year or so, especially within, this past year that we had, to be able to be in a position to work full time and actually make a living doing this now. And I'm just so grateful for all of my experiences that have led me to be in this position. And now my next goal is to focus on my organization. So, as the organization grows, I'm going to hopefully be able to do that full time. So that's the next step. So now that I've been able to say that, okay, I can make a living doing advocacy work, I want to put other people in a position in my organization to hopefully provide them with a full-time experience in animal advocacy. So I don't know how long that will take, but I'm going to do everything that I can with my organization to just put my own spin on advocacy, share my insight. I think I have a lot of style and flavor in terms of how I want to discuss animal activism and advocate for animals. And I think I have some people that will definitely be along the journey with me and will love doing it with me. So that's my next goal, is to get the organization off the ground and bring in more advocates.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it's awesome. I so look forward to that. And, I'm sure if your Twitter and your social media following is anything to go by, I'm sure you'll get heaps of support and heaps of interest in what you're doing. I can't wait to see. Chris, thank you so much for everything that you have done and continue to do for the animals. You've been an event organizer. You've worked with Anonymous for the Voiceless, DXC. You've even done some stuff for PETA. You've been helpful in so many ways to so many organizations. And as we said at the start, you are all over social media. I've been following you for ages. So it's wonderful to meet you in person, and your words are just on point in person as they are on your Twitter. Where can our viewers go to follow and support your work?
Yes, thank you so much for that. So yeah, you can go to souleubans.com, SOULEUBANKS.com. And my social media handles are SOUL_EUBANKS. And I'm on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok with all of those handles. Facebook is facebook.com/SoulEubanks. But if you go to my website, it has all of the social media platforms that I'm on there.
Thank you for that. We'll be sure to link those in the description of this video as well. And I will say as well, when folks go and check out your website, check out your music as well, because it's not like I'm a death metal dude, but like I was checking out your music, I was like, this is groovy. Like I really enjoy that. So it's well worth a check out.
Oh, thanks so much. Yeah. So for those that don't know, hip hop is my first love. So I've been making hip hop for maybe over 10, 15 years now. I haven't been focusing on it as much lately, but I still write. I still have songs. I still have like a whole album in my head that maybe one day it'll come out, maybe one day it won't. I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, thanks for that. I don't get too many people often talking about my music since I haven't really put much energy into it lately.
Oh, well, it's fantastic. I'd
Yeah,
say,
I
like,
enjoyed it.
normally like death metal and all that sort of stuff is like my sort of like groove, but like yeah, like no, it's fantastic. It's great to check that out, and it's really nice for us when we're researching then to find these other parts. We're like, oh yeah, that's
Yeah,
wicked.
exactly. And you know that album, I'm sure, will come out. Everything comes out in its own time, doesn't it? So
Absolutely.
definitely. So yeah, check out the website. There is heaps of great information. You can keep up with everything that Chris is doing as well. So thank you so much for your time. It's been such a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for all that you do. And I really appreciate just you reaching out and letting me come and speak on your platform. It's an amazing thing that you all do. I'm fans of your work probably just as much as you are fans of mine. So I'm just happy to be here.
Thank you for watching this episode. If you'd like to support our speaker, then follow the links provided in the description. If you're enjoying this content, then please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Leave a like on our videos or drop a comment with something that you've learned. Your love and support means the world to us, and we thank you all for watching this.